Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2 p.m. locker room chat, the Sports Journalist Roundtable with The Athletic. Thank you all on the panel for being here and taking the time out of your busy days. And thank you, campers, for tuning in with us. My name is Lana, and I am a Sports Biz Camps staff member. I'd like to introduce Griggs, who will be monitoring our chat. So, Griggs, say hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Griggs. I'm a part of the Sports Biz staff also, and I'm a rising senior at Carmel Christian in Matthews, North Carolina.
Awesome. And then I'd like to introduce Lindsay Broom from our panel this morning.
Hi, everybody. I'm on the board of Sports Biz Camp and just kind of here to listen and help where I can in the comments.
Awesome. And before we get started, I have some very exciting news to share. Our partners at The Athletic have a surprise for all of our Career Exploration Camp attendees. They have not only shared their talented journalist with us today, but they have shared that every camper will receive a gift of a 3-month subscription to The Athletic. There are no strings attached, no credit card needed. Everyone can get the access to the best-in-class content written by the journalist, including the ones with us today. You'll receive a special link to redeem this gift via your email next week. So a huge thank you to The Athletic. And with that being said, I'll pass it to Ryan to introduce himself and the panelist we have.
All right, well, to everyone who's joining us, thank you so much. My name is Ryan Clark. I cover the Colorado Avalanche in the NHL for The Athletic, and today's panel, we'll go ahead and start here. Our first person is Jourdan Rodrigue. For those of you from North Carolina, you've probably read Jourdan. She covered the Carolina Panthers, and now she's in Los Angeles covering the Rams in the NFL for us. Next is Tashan Reed, who's one of the talented rising stars at The Athletic. He covered Florida State for a couple seasons. Now he's covering the Las Vegas Raiders and enjoying everything Las Vegas has to offer because it's such a boring city. And then last but certainly not least is easily the biggest star of all of us. She has so many stars, her future it's amazing. Her name is Meg Linehan. She covers the NWSL, but the U.S. women's national soccer team, you know, the one that actually wins. And Meg is our source for all things really just soccer as a whole at The Athletic. If there's a question you have about the game, Meg is the person to ask. So we are your panel, and I will turn the floor back over to you, Lana, and then we'll go ahead and get going.
Awesome. So why don't we start out with how each of you got started into the sports world and what kind of, led you into all of your passions? We can start with anyone who would like to take the rails.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think I'm probably the youngest of us. I went to Mizzou, and I kind of I didn't have any previous experience in high school. I wasn't doing anything like this in high school, and so I just knew that my two biggest passions were sports and writing, and I figured I'd try to pursue a career in it. Didn't really know what that looked like, but going to Mizzou, you get thrown into the fire pretty quickly. I learned a lot my freshman and sophomore years. I didn't write that much. It was my junior year where I really started to get some experience. The way it works there is you have to take a reporting course, and you're essentially a unpaid intern for a semester. So I was covering high school sports. So I covered girls basketball, boys basketball, soccer, tennis, football. And in the following semester, I was focused on high school football, but I also went out. And this is probably one of the biggest advice points that I have is, on top of what you're doing in school, do more. And so I reached out to an SB Nation site that covered Mizzou, and they allowed me to cover Mizzou football, men's and women's basketball, on top of covering high school football for the newspaper that we had there at Mizzou. And through the work that I got through there, I applied for the Sports Journalism Institute, which is an internship program for people in college that are either people of color or women. And it sets you up with a 10-week internship. And so I was halfway through that internship, following my senior year of college, when I got reached out to by The Athletic about covering Florida State. It's almost, I think Saturday will be my 2-year anniversary since being hired. So it was my first job out of school. It was pretty difficult to adjust. And earlier this year, I was lucky enough after 2 seasons covering Florida State to be promoted to covering the Raiders. We'll see when sports actually happen and I can cover the Raiders. But for now, I'm just sort of, following along with off season and getting my feet wet in the NFL.
I can hop in. So my background, like I have no formal training in the space. I didn't do journalism school, didn't really have any experience in sports media, just kind of, I watched the 1999 Women's World Cup and got obsessed and did an internship with the Boston Breakers back in the first women's professional league. We're now on the third. And then basically completely fell away from the game until the 2011 Women's World Cup. And then just basically started asking, websites and saying, hi, how can I help you, right? And doing the work for free, essentially, for a really long time and paying my own way. So yeah, it's The Athletic has really been my first full-time job at a real sports media company. I mean, before this, also, sorry, the dog has decided to visit during the panel. But before this, I actually worked for the NWSL league itself, doing social media and content. So definitely a not traditional path in how I ended up actually at The Athletic.
Hey guys, I'm Jourdan. First and foremost, I want to say that I love that Tashan and Meg had their experiences back to back, because they are so different in terms of traditional journalistic training versus non-traditional, and like both of them are just like superstars at the company, and they won't say it, but I will say it, because Meg breaks more news than anybody at our company, and Tashan's feature writing is like, holy crap. So you don't have to have sort of the straight line path. There is no straight line path. If you're passionate about something, I think their experiences are so valuable, because you can do this. And it's about asking questions and inserting yourself into roles where you can get reps. And so like, that's how I became a writer. Was I did have the formal training. I didn't have anyone in my family who was in journalism or knew really how to go about being a writer. I went to the Arizona State University Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, which does compete with Mizzou every year for one of the best journalism schools in the country. And wins, but it's fine. Anyway, so so I went there and I got sort of pushed. I was getting pushed toward broadcast, but I really wanted to write. I wanted to be a writer so bad. And I grew up reading not only the Los Angeles Times sports columnist, where I'm out here now, but also the Arizona Republic growing up. And they had a female sports columnist. And I did not know that was something that was possible for me to do until I saw her picture in the paper. And so I started pursuing that path, and I was so passionate about writing, but again, had all of these voices tell me, go into broadcast, but it wasn't something I was passionate about. I'm glad I tried it, because I got a little bit of the view of what it could have been and what the other side looks like. But for me, writing has always been my passion. And so that's something I really pursued heavily, just like Tashan, my last 2 years of school. And actually, I took more of an in-house writing approach, writing for teams. So I wrote for Arizona State. I covered the football team, but I did it from their athletic department, right? So there's a little bit more of a spin toward the positive, toward the athletic department. And then when I left school, I started covering the WNBA, but I worked for a team, the Seattle Storm, shout out Sue Bird. And like it was more of a like slant toward the team, right? But I wanted to tell stories, the good and the bad, and the positive and the negative, and sort of the human experience. So I really threw myself into beat writing, which is what I am now. I'm a beat writer for The Athletic. I covered Penn State football for a while. I worked back in Arizona for a while, like picking up all of the stories that nobody else wanted and doing that. And I know we all have experience doing that. And then I moved out to Penn State to cover Penn State football. And then I moved to Charlotte to cover the Panthers, which was my first NFL job. And then a couple years later, The Athletic came around and was like, hey, you could be a beat writer, but we want you to be a storyteller too. And then that's like the sweet spot, I think, for any of us, because we share news and we cover our beats, quote unquote. And I cover the Rams now in Los Angeles. But we also get to tell stories that move us and impact people and make a difference. And I think that's what we all really enjoy about what we do.
I guess the short story of my path was, for me, I was first published at 13, but it was this choice between journalism, chemical engineering, or being a CIA analyst. But journalism is what I enjoyed most, and went to the University of Maine because they had a great engineering school, but the journalism program wasn't bad. But also, Maine was one of the least diverse schools in America, and I intentionally chose it because if I was going to be a journalist and a Black and Hispanic journalist, I knew I needed to know what it was like to be the only person who looked like me in a classroom setting, in a dorm room setting, even out in public when you're at dinner with your friends. And then from there, yeah, I mean, I did everything for the school: paper, news, features, sports, columns. And then as far as graduating, I mean, I graduated in '06. So I went from Orono, Maine to Richmond, Indiana, to Beaumont, Texas, to Fargo, North Dakota, to Lansing, Michigan, to Miami, Florida, Tallahassee, Florida, to Seattle, to here, where when I was in Seattle, I covered the Washington Huskies, and the NHL was my goal, but I'd kind of given up on it. And then in a matter of 2 weeks, The Athletic, the Tampa Bay Times, and Boston Globe reached out and said, how would you like to cover the NHL? And that's really kind of it. So yeah, that's kind of the short, boring version of my story. So let's go ahead and jump in to some questions. It'll be a mix of different things, and at interludes, we will definitely hit our Q&A just to, get some thoughts from our campers. So let's kind of start here. What would the three of you recommend be things to study in college for anyone getting interested in the journalism, in terms of just what are things to look at? So like, for example, I graduated in '06, and my professors had no idea that social media would even be a thing. And now we've all seen how if you don't know how to use social media, it can be disastrous. So tell you what, let's go ahead, and who will be the first victim? I choose Meg. So Meg, you go for it.
Yeah, I mean, so I majored in literature in college, also graduated in '06. I wrote my thesis on Harry Potter, so that's really paid off long term. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I think one of the things that's been really helpful for me is not just having writing as a skill, but like I take photos and I can do video, and like obviously social media is super important, but like getting a taste of all of these different aspects, because like I think our job is fundamentally what we're doing right now, writing, but I've used all of those other skills to fill out stories or to like make sure that my stories get read. And like the fact that I just started a podcast as well, right? Like I am not a podcast person, so to now be 4 episodes into a podcast is still like low-key blowing my mind right at the moment. But I do think, fundamentally all of these things just come down to like, can you see another person? Like you're telling a story about someone else. Are you seeing that person? Are you using every single tool that you have in your toolbox to tell the story of that person and to understand that person and make sure that you are doing everything in your power to tell that story the way that it should be told? And so whether that's writing or photography or video or, getting the story seen on social media, I think that's really for me, everything that it boils down to is I try to take like a really player forward approach in the way that I do my job.
Yeah, I think for me, going to Mizzou in a formal journalism school, a lot of the basics of the history of journalism and the ethics and the best practices are kind of drilled into you as a freshman and sophomore. So I got all that pretty early. But I think the biggest thing that I had to, it's something that's really simple, but whether if you're a writer, you need to read like actual journalism. Like learning from this book is only going to teach you so much. Like you have to, like it could be an article about anything. Like don't box yourself into just what you're interested in. Like I'm a huge basketball and football fan, but if there's a really nice feature on something about soccer, I'll read it just because you can learn how to be a better writer, how to approach things from different angles, tackle difficult subjects. And then if you're on the broadcast side, study people. And like, obviously we all watch TV, but, see how they go about their business, how they carry themselves, and get on the report. Even if you are on broadcast, even still, it's important to read. I think people kind of segment themselves and, how Meg was saying, she wouldn't expect to do a podcast. Don't box yourself into one thing, because as we're learning in 2020 as a journalist, you're asked to do a little bit of everything. You have to write, you got to be on video, you're going to do podcasts, you're going to do radio. And so you have to learn all of that. And it sounds overwhelming, but that's where you work on that while you're still in school before you're on this professional platform where if you mess up, everybody sees it. It's this big deal. When you're in college or high school, like you might feel like everybody's watching you, but nobody's watching you. Like that's when you mess up. That's when you work through it. That's when you grind. And so it's just take in everything around you and view it under the lens of trying to learn from it, instead of just kind of, I feel like, especially now, we kind of just, everything's daily. We just scan through, whether it's on social media, we don't really take it in, like stop, ingest it, learn from it and grow from it.
Yeah, I think reading everything, a variety of things, I think that's so important. I love profile writing. I love great profile writing, where you really dig into a subject and a person and try to communicate who that person is, their why, sort of everything about them that you can. I think that reading a diverse set of voices, not just profiles, but news stories, just different things. I really like to read fiction and nonfiction, because I think that even though we work in nonfiction, fiction helps your brain open up a little bit better, and it helps you understand how characters are built. And usually when authors write fiction, they're building characters based off of what they know intrinsically as a human being. And so you just understanding what details can be included about the human experience, I think is so important. For me, when I was in school, again, like I had the traditional journalism path like Tashan, and I would just try everything. Like you don't get, like, you're very, very much in a box when you do that. And I think it's a great structure to have because you're learning about the pillars and all of these things, but try everything, try more, try things that you don't think you're going to like. Take the internship for one semester that you think is like way outside of your interest field, because even if you don't like it and you come away with it thinking, well, I'm not going to do that, technically you've still accomplished something because you've gained some knowledge of something different. And putting yourself in those situations as a journalist, you have to put yourself in other people's lives and other people's shoes every single day. And so getting practiced in doing that and doing things outside the norm and being different and trying new things is just all great practice for when you're in the field.
I'll say the thing I throw in before we go to our next question is I would say make sure you learn how to study all sorts of different things, because, like, for example, covering the Avalanche, it's a team that it has players from Quebec, Finland, Russia, Sweden, Germany, the Czech Republic, and knowing things about where those players are from. That way, when you go into them and you talk to them in the dressing room, like, you're just not asking hockey questions, you're asking different questions. So, like, with me, and this is super nerd alert. So I first started speaking Russian when I was like 12 years old, and I studied it for 3 years in high school. And so whenever there's been Russian players, it's like you're able to break the ice because you know the language, you are able to follow what goes on in that country, and it's an advantage that no one else has. So think about what you want to do, whether that's sports, news, features, whatever, and then start looking at things that you think could help you later down the road, and it could help you sort of get better in that regard. So that said, let's jump to the Q&A. So yeah, this first question is, what was the best piece of advice you all received from anyone in the sports media industry? So tell you what, let's go ahead and start off with Tashan on this one.
Yeah, I think there's something that I had to learn while I was in college. It's kind of stemming from what we just talked about, but it was he didn't mean this literally, but one of my mentors told me to never say no when it comes to an assignment. Like I said, I'd never watched really golf. It's something I had to do for my internship that I had after college. I went and covered a PGA Tour event. That was the first thing I did, and I was there for a week. I didn't know anything. I had no idea what I was doing, but I just jumped into it, and you figure it out, and you learn as you go, and you end up becoming better from kind of spontaneous experiences like that. And so where, later in your career, if something comes up related to that somehow, you're prepared for it. And that's something that I think people get a little too full of themselves, like, especially if you think you're talented and people tell you that, you're like, oh, I don't have to do that. Like, oh, I'm too good for that. Kind of what Jourdan was talking about, with the internships. It's like some people box themselves in. We're like, no, I want an internship writing about this specifically, or I'm not doing it. I'm gonna just chill for the summer. It's like, no, like, you have to take every opportunity you can get. Obviously, if you have multiple options, choose the best one when it's the best fit for you. But don't feel too good to do something, because especially when you're at this age, all you need to be doing is gaining experience and learning.
Yeah, I love that, because I think it's so true. You have to be open to everything, because everything is helping you grow, and every pitch that you get, every opportunity that you get is a chance to really have an impact and really either learn something yourself, or tell a story nobody's heard before, or find a new angle in which to look at something. You know, I would also kind of piggyback on that, and that's be open to change. And I think all of us have been we've circumnavigated the country several times at this point. Like we have been open to moving where the opportunity has presented itself. And that's something where the act of physically uprooting yourself and placing yourself in a new environment is the kind of growth that is invaluable as a human being, first and foremost, but also as a person who's trying to tell stories, as a person, whether you're broadcast, your print, your PR, anything, as a person who is trying to share stories and to, be a storyteller in that regard, physically uprooting yourself and putting yourself in a new environment, you see things with new eyes. You challenge yourself in different ways. There are tough days that you get through that you just realize, I'm growing as an individual, as a sports writer, as a sports broadcaster. And if you shut yourself out to those opportunities, you just never know. I had never seen snow when I moved from Arizona to State College, Pennsylvania for my first beat writing job. And the first time it snowed, it blew my mind. And I never thought I'd be living in State College, Pennsylvania. But it led me to here. And I don't think I would be here without seeking that opportunity and being open to driving and moving across the country at 22, and just deciding I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump feet first all the way into this. And I definitely don't think I would be here right now if I didn't take that opportunity. So you just never know which opportunity is going to lead you to the right one.
I think for me, my background is so different in that, I cover women's sports, right, which don't have the same infrastructure as men's sports. So for me, it's really coming at it, I think, from a slightly different perspective, which my job doesn't exist at most other media outlets. I'm really the only full-time women's soccer reporter in the country that works for a mainstream media spot. This job doesn't exist at ESPN. It doesn't exist at Bleacher Report. It doesn't exist at any of these other companies. So the thing that I have to get told on an actually pretty regular basis by my bosses is to chill out for a few minutes and actually breathe and take time off. And I don't have to tell every single story. I don't have to do every single piece of coverage on my own, right? That you are allowed to both do that work and also take care of yourself at the same time. I'm in the middle of a tournament. I've been up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and then back up at 7 o'clock in the morning in order to turn stories around. So that's the thing that I constantly have to be reminded of yes, I definitely want to work hard and I want to be the best at my job, because also I am trying to prove that this is a job that other people should have. But at the same time, I need to be a fully functioning adult human being who eats meals and sleeps and all that kind of fun stuff. So even as you do the hustle, you have to make sure that you're doing it in a way that is responsible to yourself as a fully functioning human being. And I think that's really important, especially as you're starting out and trying to take risks and trying to take chances and making sure that you take assignments that you might not otherwise take. Also make sure that you're taking care of yourself at that same time.
For me, I'd probably say it's realizing the key to being the smartest person in the room is realizing you're not, and listening to everyone and whatever advice they have. I mean, you might hear bad advice, but the thing is, you can learn from that bad advice. Sometimes the best examples are the worst ones, so you know what not to do going forward. But I'd say it's really being open to everything and just being willing to sit there and listen and say, this is how I can get better. And it certainly helps. So let's go ahead and jump on to some questions. It's weird being a moderator, because it's my job to talk, but I'm not trying to talk. So there we go. So we'll throw a couple questions before we jump back to the QA. So let's do this one. How can one who's an aspiring sports journalist, how do they go about networking? how do you make a positive impression on someone such as yourself? I'll take this one first and then be quiet. I would say, honestly, the best one is just understand that there's going to be rejection. There's going to be some people who say, yes, they want to talk to you, and other people who say, no, I'm not interested. And, that's their choice. I mean, don't get frustrated, but I just say, just try to work past that. And then when you get to network with people, definitely get to know them, make sure they get to know you, but make sure it's done in a balance to where you're trying to make it seem like there's a relationship you're trying to build going forward. And it's not so transactional, because the more I think organic or natural you can be with someone, the better off it'll work out. So whoever wants to take this one next, it's your choice. If not, I will gladly pick a victim here. I mean, a participant here. So who wants to go next?
Yeah, I can take this. I try to mentee a lot of people. And by the way, that is also an invitation. I think our information is going to be included. If anyone has any questions after this, I think all of us are very open to mentoring and all of that. I mentor a lot of people, and it's the thing that I constantly say when they're like, what do I do? What's the right thing to do? I'm like, you're doing it right now. You emailed me cold. Like, you called me cold, and you were like, what do I do? How can I be better? How can I get better? And then you accepted guidance, and you accepted tools and techniques. And you guys would be shocked at how many people just don't reach out, just don't make the phone call, don't send the email. And I don't know, maybe it's out of fear that maybe someone won't respond or you'll feel invalid or something like that, but just always send the email, always send the DM, always make the phone call, and just ask, because there's no harm in it. And I think that's super important. And I loved what Ryan said too about making sure it's not transactional, because, we are people as well who, have our jobs and our things that are our highs and our lows and our own human experience. And so to hear from a mentee constantly just asking, what can you do for me? That's a little tough sometimes. And so it's really great when a mentee is like, hey, I saw this story in the news. What do you think about that? Or like having an organic conversation about other topics outside of just work, because in that space you also are growing, because you're having that dialogue with somebody who is really challenging you to think and grow, and just having an organic conversation. And I think that's really important, is to not just be like, what can you do for me? But instead be like, how can we have great conversations about the world around us? And then thereby doing so, we can grow.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is your approach. You don't ever want your first contact with somebody to be you asking them for something, particularly, do you know if there's any jobs available at the Athletic? Are there any internships at the Athletic? It's not that I don't want to help you, but it's like you need to lead off with more so the questions that you're asking here. How did you get started in the industry? What advice do you have somebody that's looking to get started? And then also on the other side of that is just like, none of us here have ever or will ever like hire somebody at the Athletic. That's not our job. We don't have that power. Even if we love you and want to, we can't do it. So that even asking us that kind of is a mute point. But yeah, just come off genuine. Don't be too stiff. I know sometimes if you're depending on how high profile the person is, you may get nervous, and that's normal. But try not to let that show in your approach, because that can be a little bit of a deterrent with people. And as I said, just try to get to know them. It depends on the setting. Obviously, if you're in a group setting and there's a panel and there's 100 people trying to approach David Aldridge or something like this, different. But, if you have somebody's email, you have their number, you're DMing them, just try to be genuine, be yourself. And kind of how Jourdan was saying, just don't get to what can you do for me? What can you do for me? What can you do for me? Because that's kind of a turn off as somebody I'm still young, but I'm starting to become kind of in that mentor role a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Just like, I definitely get people who ask, and like, I've also gotten people who are like, hey, I have a homework assignment due. Can you tell me about the equal pay lawsuit with the U.S. Women's National Team? And I'm like, no, I can't. That's not, I have a job. Thank you. But I think like, it's always really easy to tell who's already engaging with your work when they want to have a conversation. And I think that's really one of the easiest ways to build a relationship of like, hey, I read this article, I want to have a follow-up conversation, or like, I want to talk more about this. And then instead of turning it into like networking, it's let's actually like have a conversation first and then figure out like, what is the part of it that interests you so much? Or like, what is your viewpoint and why do you think your viewpoint should be heard? Like that's, I think, a much easier conversation to have with someone rather than just like cold calling and be like, hey, what jobs are available, or I want to write. Like start with a topic that you're super interested in, that you're going to a person that is also interested in that topic. And I think it makes it so much easier for everyone involved.
And spell the person's name right when you email them. I don't respond to emails addressed to Mr. Rodrigue. So, and please spell the person's name right, because it shows that you actually have been following their work. Or like, don't send the email and then follow on Twitter. Like, we see that, you know, like if you say you're following our work, great. But we could tell if you're not. So please spell the name right.
Also, please don't, like, again, on top of asking for a job, first contact, don't ask me to like share your article or something first. It's just like, don't lead off with like, who do you approach like that in life? You know, like you make friends with somebody, you don't walk up to them, ask for some of their you know, cookies or something like that as your first contact. Like, you know, just be a person, you know, be natural, like, you know, treat them like you would anybody else, not just because they can potentially help you down the line. Don't let that alter how you approach them.
I will say that when I meet Meg in real life, I'm just going to start screaming because she's amazing. So.
Well, now that we've gotten that piece of advice from Mr. Rodriguez, which again, see, when I say that out loud, that just proves the point. So again, it sounds really, really basic, but you would be surprised. And as someone whose last name people are like, oh, Mr. Clark with an E, there's no E. It's not that hard. So we're gonna go a little off script here. I know we have some questions that, you know, we had come up with, but we are here for you because, like Trick Daddy, we love the kids. And if there's someone here who knows who Trick Daddy is, I will be impressed. So let's jump back to the Q&A because this is why we're here. So here's a really good question from Carter Bain. Who or what was your biggest inspiration into taking the job you're in now? And of course, anyone can answer this. Let's start with Meg, because I think this could be a really interesting answer, just because, I mean, Meg, you are the only person like you in this industry. And I mean this the nicest way possible. I think we all wish there were more, that we saw ESPN and other places cover women's soccer, because, I mean, it is a thing, it is growing. So let's start with you. You are in a most unique position. Who was your biggest inspiration?
Yeah, I think it's honestly, I mean, I wouldn't be in this job without my former editor, George, who was the one that approached me and said, like, you know, we're making this job and no one else is going to have this job, right? And we're making this investment and we think that you're the right person for it. So it's really just, you know, I was already working at the league. I was working at NWSL. The term that really makes me nervous when talking about working in sports is the word dream job, because I think we lean really heavily on the word dream and not as heavily on the word job. And there is some real, the second word is just as important as the first word. And I think that we forget that it is work, right? And that there are going to be parts of it that are not super fun. As much as I love, like I went to France last summer and covered a World Cup, right? Like there is no real downside to that. I also like did not sleep and just like, you know, busted my entire self for 35 days. I had 2 days off that entire World Cup. Like it is work. But I do think like without George and without knowing like The Athletic was really invested in that, I would not be doing this job, because like, again, I thought the NWSL was my dream job, like being inside the league, being able to make change, but then specifically going after this job because it was going to put me in a space where I could interact with like, especially like essentially men, like male sports fans that I think don't give true respect to women's sports, and knowing that I had a shot to change their minds. Because I think that that's really work that needs to happen. And that was work that I actively wanted to do. Also knowing that that was going to be an uphill battle. So I think without getting that, George, like I turned the job down the first time he offered it for me. And then he came back to me and was like, no, I truly think that this is the right call for you. And so I don't think I would be in this job without that, without like the 4 or 5 phone calls that we had walking me through what it would mean. And, you know, like, obviously there was also a trip to France on the table, which does not hurt, but like fundamentally it was a really big shift for me and for my career.
Yeah, I think my greatest inspiration, it wasn't something related to journalism. It's kind of a cliche, but it's my dad. He's somebody that he was born in 1948. You know, as a Black man in America, that was a very hostile time. You know, he grew up in the projects, made it out, fought in Vietnam, came back home and worked for 30, 40 years to support his family, me and my siblings. And something that I saw out of him was just like a relentless work ethic. Like, no matter what was going on, what personal issues he had, what happened in life, how he was treated by others, he never stopped hustling. And that was something that I took with me first as a student, but then also as a professional. It's like, especially in a year like this, you know, 2020, I mean, we have a pandemic going on. We have no sports to write about as sports writers. I had to move coast to coast from Florida to Las Vegas. Like, my family's been affected by the pandemic. I have every reason to complain or take time off or slack off, but I'm still grounded. And it's like, you just have to keep that same, obviously take time for yourself. Don't overkill it, but that's what separates you. And then that's what makes people notice you. That's what gets you these jobs. You know, you aren't going to get by just always being comfortable with having things your way. Sometimes you're going to have to drill in. And as Meg was saying earlier, you know, be up till 3 a.m. and wake up at 7. It's not ideal. Nobody wants to do that necessarily, but you got to do it. So that's my biggest thing, especially when you're in school. It's like you have nothing to worry about. You can just focus on literally that. And so just keep at it.
Mine, it's weird to say this. It was actually a football game. I was raised in a sort of alternative sport household. We weren't real big football fans. My mom played softball, so we were really, and we played soccer as kids. And I know that's not an alternative sport, but you know, like we were just not the, you know, football family. And I grew up in Arizona, and I saw hope, please don't tell me how old any of you guys on this call were when this game happened, but the Boise State upset of Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. The Boise State upset Oklahoma on a series of trick plays, and it's like I still just like laugh in delight when I see it. And I didn't know, I thought football was such a structured sport, and it was so stern and just like all of these rules and everything had to happen in a certain way. And you're seeing these like hook and laterals, and you're seeing the Statue of Liberty where like someone's tucking the ball under their armpit before handing. I mean, it just was wild. And to me, the exhilaration of pushing boundaries within that game and within the structure of the game itself, the sport itself, was like, I just felt something change in me. And I thought, I don't know anything about what just happened, but I'm going to find out. And so I just started reading. And that's when I came upon Paula Boyven at the Arizona Republic, the female columnist I mentioned earlier, and saw that women do this job. And I thought to myself, years down the road, when I got my first newspaper byline, where they put my picture next to it. And I thought to myself, this is and I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional right now, because it's someone else maybe picked that up and thought, I can do this. And I know we have every single one of us on this call have had that experience where someone saw us existing and doing our job and thought, I can do this too, because I see somebody who looks like me in the newspaper, or on Twitter, or on TV, or on these podcasts, or anything like that. And to me, that continues to be an inspiration, but also my coworkers really inspire me. I mean, you hear me on this call, I'm like everyone's biggest fan, right? So like my coworkers inspire me to be better and to do better, because I think about all of the space that they're creating and that we're creating. And it's just, to me, it's monumental. And I think that seeking out that consistent I loved what Meg said about dream job, because I think as a part of that, within that, you seek out what continues to move you and continues to propel you and continues to inspire you. And I don't think it can ever be any one thing. I just think it's a constantly, you're constantly looking for those voices and those people and those things that inspire you.
For me, I guess the answer would be probably anybody who says I can't do anything. And I think that's something we've all kind of faced at some point. But I think for me, the reason it continues to drive just because it's, I'm that guy who I don't want to win by touchdown. I want to win by 70. But it's also, I think it's just the whole idea of like, it's trying to show the world that you might have it in a box that only certain people can do certain things, but the reality is anybody can do anything. And, you never know what you might find. Like, I mean, I cover an NHL team and people look at me and go like, you're ethnic minority. What do you know about hockey? And then they read me and they're like, wow, who knew you knew this much about hockey? And it's like, yeah, I know. And they also let us in the White House to do more than cook and clean, but I digress. And so like, it's just trying to show people that like, just because you have this preconceived notion doesn't mean that this is how it's going to work. I mean, you look at everybody on this panel and at some point they've been all told no, and that's why they're here. And the person who told them no is probably frying fish somewhere. So let's jump on to the next question here. Let's see, there's some good ones. Okay. How are you all knowledgeable in the sports you cover now before you began? If not, how did you learn about football, hockey, and soccer? I definitely want to know how everyone learned about hockey. And if they don't, that's perfectly fine. I will judge you later in an atmosphere where there's no one listening. So let's see. I always have fun going to Tashan on these because it's just, him and I have these conversations off to the side. So Tashan, we'll start off with you.
Yeah, I think when it comes to, I kind of had a cheat code when it came to learning the sport that I cover now, just because I played football growing up. So, and my family, but my introduction to sports is really just my dad and my brothers were just so obsessed with sports. Like, we would have something on, like even like our football and basketball was our biggest thing. But if that's not on, all right, baseball, fine. Like we're in the St. Louis, it's Cardinals, put that on. We don't really care about baseball, but or Tiger Woods, he's having his run in the early 2000s, put that on. And so it's just constantly having it always surrounded by me. It was just kind of inevitable that I would learn about it. But when it comes to more the in detail, like strategic, especially with the athletic, we do a lot of. And Jourdan will know, like, we start talking about what 21 personnel is and 11 personnel and what these different, blocking schemes are and how they work. It's really just doing, for one, talking within, our colleagues. I think we have more colleagues that's specifically what they do, and that's all they do is analyze film. And so I'll just reach out to them. Don't, that's just in general. Particularly if you get a job on a sport that you don't really know, don't be afraid to own that. Like, whether it could be even with your bosses, like I said, colleagues, or even, other, players and coaches that you come across. That's something that as a journalist, they probably rather get asked is, hey, can you break down like this part of the offense for me? They may not do it because they're super like, secretive about that kind of stuff in sports. But if you're cool enough with them, they might, give you a quick little rundown. And it's just owning, not knowing. Like, that's kind of like our job as journalists is like, at the beginning, you don't know anything. You're walking into this new beat. You don't know any sources. You aren't like automatically plugged in. We don't become Adrian Wojnarowski from day one. It's like, you come in with that baseline, knowledge. Maybe you follow a team before, but to really get in depth, you kind of have to own that and do the work required to learn. And so it's kind of just sends back to what I said earlier, just having that hustle and that drive and being unafraid.
So Meg, let's jump to you.
Yeah, I think, I grew up playing soccer. I also grew up, I'm from outside of Boston originally, so I grew up like with Celtics season tickets through my family. And so like just definitely a sports kid. The fun part for me is not necessarily making sure that I've got like 100% of the soccer, technicality stuff. I also now am in the middle of covering a lawsuit. So for me, it has actually been a lot of late night, like I get court filings Friday nights. For a while there during the pandemic, it was like every Friday night there would be a new court filing, and it was extremely technical. And like part of it you can read through as like a normal human and kind of understand and know what's happening, but some of it is literally like trying to Google like court cases that they're referencing. Some of it is Googling like legal terminology and trying to make sense of it, not only so that way I understand it, but then my readers understand it. So like that's also the joy of sports too, is not just knowing like how to break plays down, but there's so much more to the world of sports. Like I cover business stuff, I cover the legal stuff, like there's so much more than just what is happening on a field or in the rink, right? So being able to at least have some sort of passing understanding of that is also like a huge skill. And again, like as Tashan is saying, like that's part of the hustle, is like catching yourself up on all of these other elements that go into covering sports, because it is not, as we all know, like sticking to sports is literally impossible. So that's definitely another part of it as well.
As a female covering the NFL, I have never played football. And so I tried once in 7th grade and they wouldn't let me, but that's another story for another day. But I'm still bitter about it, as you could tell. So you automatically are at a disadvantage, right? Because you never played. You don't know what it's like to be hit. You don't know what it's like to physically, run through plays on a field, or dive into a playbook in that way. So for me, a lot of my very early learning about the game was through reading everything I could. I would sit at the practices at the high school when I was in high school, after track practice was over, and I would just sit there and listen to what they were saying and try to write stuff down and then Google what it meant. And I would do those types of things when I was young. When I got to college, it was a lot of asking, just sending emails, seeing if anyone would help me learn about certain things, trying to look on YouTube for coaching clinics and diagramming plays and things like that. And then when I was fortunate enough to get my first beat writing job at Penn State, I just would ask questions. I would just ask the coaches questions. And at first it kind of threw them off, because they're like, why does this reporter want to know about like the 6th play of the second half that we call, like, why? But really it was for me. And I'd always say, like, look, let's talk. I'd like to talk off the record. I just want to know. I just want to learn. And since then, I have found so much knowledge and mentoring and guidance and tutelage, actually from the coaches and the assistant coaches that I cover, all from talking off the record about what they were thinking when they called X, Y, or Z play, how they designed it, the inner workings of a practice, just little details that I'm so fascinated by, because I didn't get those when I was young. They didn't come naturally to me, because I wasn't physically moving through the act of them. Right. So I just was so fascinated by all of it. And then when you are that person enough, like, in your facilities, and I was always like kind of, in Charlotte, it was funny because they were always like, all right, Jourdan's coming over. Like, she's got something she wants to clarify, like all of this stuff. And like, but then you go off the record, you get pulled off the record, and then you just talk and you talk and you talk and you just learn. And every interaction that you have, you're learning something. And to me, that's the most fantastic part of this job, is you can learn something every day and then communicate it with other people in some form. And I also think that, and Ryan said this earlier, is like, you have to also be okay with what you don't know, and then seek out people that are smarter than you. And I work at a company full of people who are smarter than me. So I get to ask people questions all the time and pick people's brains. And I think as long as such a huge part of this job is just always not just asking questions of the subject you cover, asking questions of everybody around you and learning constantly and seeking that knowledge.
Well, we have about 11 minutes left, so I'll say this. For anybody who has any questions that didn't get answered or things you wanted to ask but you weren't sure how to ask, send me an email at rclark, C-L-A-R-K, @theathletic.com. And if it's for me, I will try to get it answered. If it's for any one of our panelists, I will pass it along to them and we will get back with you. Just wanted to throw that out there. So I'll answer that question. We'll jump to hopefully 2 more before we're done. I would say for me, it's probably been about being as big of a nerd about everything as you possibly can. And so if it's a sport you cover or a sport you don't cover, try to get to know the ins and outs of it, what makes it different, why does it work, so on and so forth. So one example I'll give you is Formula One racing. I'm the biggest F1 fan you're ever going to find. And to me, it's more than just about who wins or loses, but it's about track strategy, pitch strategy. Why did they do this? So on and so forth. I mean, it's the same thing with all these sports. If it's soccer, it's like, why does a team run a 4-2-3 1 instead of a 4-3-3? Or if it's the NFL, you know, how does the cap work in this situation, and so on and so forth. So I think it's things like that, and realizing that all this stuff translates more than people realize. Because when you move from college to pro, one of the questions editors love to ask is, how are you prepared to deal with a salary cap? And it's like, bruh, I deal with scholarships. Or, you know, how can you handle free agency? It's like, if I can deal with a 17-year-old who wears purple one day committing to TCU and wears green the next, saying they're looking at the University of Florida, I think I can handle free agency just fine. So a couple more questions and that'll be it. This one comes from Solomon, which this is a pretty interesting one. What would you say is the hardest part of your job from a day-to-day aspect? Meg, let's go ahead and start with you.
That's a good one. I think generally it's just making sure that I'm balancing everything I need to balance, because now, like, between the writing, the podcast, like, just my wife likes to say that I approach my job like a labor organizer in a way, which I think is slightly different, but that I try to maintain so many conversations all at the same time. Like, I'm talking with the people who run the Players Association on a regular basis. Like, I'm talking with coaches, and like Jourdan is saying, like, all of these are just happening, right? Like, I'm just chit chatting and sending texts and all that kind of stuff, but like, having those relationships, and some of them, you know, I'm lucky because I came from the league and I have a lot of existing relationships, but just, you know, making sure that I'm talking to everyone, because A, it's going to give me a better sense of the actual job I'm trying to do, but then informing the reporting that I'm trying to do, informing the podcast, like knowing who has a good story to tell for the podcast, things like that. So yeah, I think it's really just balancing all of the work. As I said before, like my big struggle is like, okay, going to bed at a reasonable time, getting up at a normal time, getting the work done. I do struggle with like feeling like I have just this entire world of sports to cover. And, but I do think that is my fun of the day to day, is just trying to feel like I've accomplished what I want to accomplish.
I think for me, there's a sense of, it's something that I may not notice every day, but I carry with me just because of something I can't change, but it's just the isolation that comes with being, you know, in the more minority as a Black sports writer, particularly a Black writer covering NFL. There's just not many of us, whether you're a man or a woman. And so there's a certain level of like responsibility that comes with that, of I want to be as good as I possibly be anyway, but also so that more people that look like me get this opportunity down the line. And then also there's naturally, with some of the opinions that I have and you know, kind of experiences that I share as a result of being a Black man, there's a blowback that comes with it, whether it's social media or my comment section. I don't care, like it doesn't bother me, but it does piss you off. And, you know, you kind of get into this tug of war of like, do I respond to this account with no profile picture with 30 followers because they said something racist, or do I just let it fly? You know, and it's something that you can easily get in trouble over. I mean, like if you lose your cool for 1 second and just say something that you shouldn't say on a public, especially when you have a platform like this, you can get fired from that, lose your job, lose everything. And so it's kind of tough to balance that dynamic while also at the same time, like, wanting to be unapologetically who you are. And for me, it's as a Black man to make others feel comfortable in that as well. And so it's kind of tough to navigate. I'm sure Ryan has some similar kind of dynamic, and even Meg and Jourdan as women in this industry. It's just something that's just tough to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, I would say I struggle with harassment online. And I think, you know, you have all these different like bosses in your life, and some of them will be like, just ignore it. And it's just so not possible to ignore it. you know, because you have to be online as a part of your job. And we all know this is like part of curating and sharing your work is also being engaging with people on social media. So you can't avoid seeing some of the things that you see. And I think like when you are so dialed in and trying to balance all of the different responsibilities and all of the different deadlines and projects that you really want to just share with the world and create and just constantly be pushing yourself to be better, and all of a sudden someone comes flying in and says some horrible stuff to you, you're just like you get knocked off your spot a little bit, right? And it's just hard. It's hard to constantly be recalibrating yourself in that way. So I think that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, like I want to recognize that, like, you know, me having this platform is such a privilege, and you know, the things that I experience are such a minute level to what Tashan, what Ryan, what Meg experience. But at the same time, collectively, the types of commentary that you receive sometimes when you're just trying to share good work out into the world, it can knock you off your spot. And so recalibrating while also pushing yourself to do great work is I think, a huge challenge, and something that I am very fortunate to have coworkers who speak openly about their experiences, because then you feel I'm not completely alone in this.
One thing I'll add before we run is this. It goes back to what we've all kind of said, which is it's that feeling of no matter what you do, there's always going to be someone who looks at you and says, well, you're this, you're that, you can't do that job. And look at something that it's strange, because sometimes the people you deal with in those situations might not be fans. They might be other beat writers. There have been plenty of times I've walked in the press boxes in the NHL where you get a double take from someone and they give you this look like you don't belong. I'll share this short story. It was the first event I covered. It was the NHL draft in Dallas, and there's only 3 black men who cover the NHL. And the NHL is a place where there's just not a lot of diversity. I remember walking around and, you know, I got looks from a lot of people who were not coworkers, like, what are you doing here? And one of the nicest people I met was the Avs PR person. And in the wake of George Floyd, I told her how, like, you being nice and just treating like a human being, like, it was a welcoming thing. And it made this person cry for like 10 straight minutes. And it's just like, sometimes, don't get me wrong, traveling, well, let me rephrase it. If you cover the NFL, you have no real travel. You travel once a week and you stay in your nice hotels. Like, they don't have to go anywhere horrible. They get to go to, like, I don't know, San Diego. Well, they used to go to San Diego, but they get to go like Los Angeles and Atlanta. Like, come to Edmonton in January and get at me. But the point is, like, you have things that are difficult about your job. And so you have all those things you're dealing with. And then to deal with that on top of it, it can be a lot. So when you find those people who are good people to deal with, that's where it's even better. So that being said, we've got 2 minutes left, so we'll keep it quick with this one question for everyone going off script. Tashan, Jourdan, Meg, for you, in 30 seconds or less, what's the best piece of advice you can give to everybody here about how to navigate things going forward? Meg, we'll start with you, then Jourdan, then Tashan.
You gotta stop starting with me. I think that it's just, I think Tashan probably said it best, like, you have to read other people's work. Like, I mean, I set aside time every single day to read work from people who cover the same stuff, who cover other things, reading stuff from The Athletic, like, investing time into seeing what other people are doing will only make you better. And I think that's such a huge part of it.
Am I next? Sorry. I think I'm next. Okay. I would say very succinctly is just never stop pushing to learn more. Never stop asking questions, even if it's not related to your job. Just constantly be seeking and learning and trying to grow as a person, as a writer, be authentic in that, and just continue to ask questions.
I would say, you know, absorb every bit of knowledge that you can, and put it to use. Like, don't just, you know, like I said, you know, no matter what school you go to, Mizzou, whatever J school you think is the best. You know, I personally have my biases, but you have to actually go out and put it to use. You have to act. You have to be unafraid to get that experience. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere in this industry.
I would say don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're less than, that you can do all the things anybody else can do. And when you deal with children from pretentious journalism schools like Arizona State and Missouri, and you go to the University of Maine and you're the one leading the panel and not them, it allows them to realize that, hey, maybe their schools aren't as great as they think. I kid, but kind of sort of, especially more Mizzou. Arizona State, I like Arizona State. Good weather, nice kids, wonderful people. So look, on that note, thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to us. You have all of our emails, but again, feel free to reach out at any point. And again, thank you guys so much for having us all.
Awesome. Thank you all again for this amazing panel. Sincerely, Ryan, Meg, Tashan, Jourdan, thank you for being here and sharing your insights and experiences with our campers today. Another huge thank you to The Athletic for the special gift to all of our campers. Campers, all of the emails will be sent next week. Be sure to complete all your challenges on the Career Explorer Pass program on Ascend. There's another college prep session happening right now at 3 p.m. Quickly check the daily agenda to see which one you'd like to jump on. Other than that, we'll see all of our campers at 4 p.m. for our all-team meeting. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you all to our panelists.